The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
The subject of death and dying can be a very difficult conversation to have. Many of us avoid having the conversation because it makes us uncomfortable. We don't want to worry or upset our loved ones, and we really don't want to face tough questions or think about our own death. Having open conversations about death and dying allows us to prepare ourselves and our loved ones on how we would like to create our own end-of-life journey. On every episode of Guided Crossings, we will explore a different part of the dying process and offer suggestions on how to prepare your loved ones as well as yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Sebastian, and this is Guided Crossings. Hello and welcome to our first episode of Guided Crossings. I'm your host, Andrea Sebastian. So 92% of people like to have the end-of-life discussion and think it's important, but only 32% of people actually do. So today we're going to talk all about that, starting the conversation. And my first guest is no stranger to this sort of topic, and she has been a hospice worker for over 35 years, so she's a professional. It's Janice McDormand. Janice, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you for this opportunity. It's really great. When I started in this work 35 years ago, people avoided these topics like the plague, so it was hard to get an audience because it's a difficult topic, it's uncomfortable. So
I see that. I mean, you've been in it for 35 years. It is a hard conversation. I was thinking as I was preparing for this show, actually, growing up and how we just never spoke about it. And even our parents didn't want to talk to us about it, at least in my situation, because they didn't want to upset us,
right.
And here we are, for you 35 years later, what sorts of things have you seen that have been advancements, per se, in the whole conversation?
So you gave the statistics, and that number has not moved for years.
So interesting.
Really, the whole time that I've done hospice, it's been that statistic that many people, almost 100%, say they'd like to talk about it, but only 30% actually do have the forms in place, so have actually made plans for advanced care. That may have changed a little bit, so that you should know there's studies that have been done both nationally and in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire has done some surveys every year. And the general public, it always comes out the same, around 30%. But I think since COVID-19 happened, there's been more movement because people of all ages are worrying about that and are potentially thinking about it for their family members. So I did hear last summer that there was much more activity in terms of people trying to get information about advance directives and having those conversations within their family.
Why do you think it's so difficult? I mean, we plan for everything in our life, right? And then when it comes to our end of life, which,
Yes.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I even have a hard time. I mean, I'm an end of life doula and I'm doing this show, and I actually have a hard time going, do I call it death and dying? Like it's, and I remember talking to a girlfriend one time saying it's a real tragedy. One of our coworkers had passed, and I said, I can't believe she died. And she said, oh, she crossed over.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like I had never looked at it from that perspective. And you don't every day sit down with someone and say, hey, let's talk about this.
Right.
So why do you think people have such a hard time with it?
Language matters, and I think you're right. We use a lot of words other than death and dying. And we tried to change that over the years in hospice because there are we've lost someone. We often say we lost someone. And for children, they go, if you lost Uncle Jim, you could lose me. So, we do try to pay attention to the words. I think people, the older I get, the more I see that we're afraid of talking about death and dying. We're afraid of aging, so we don't want to talk about dying. They're linked together. And I think people avoid it because the immediate thought is, I don't need that yet. I'm not old enough to need that yet. But it's with an underlying fear of, if I talk about it if I actually do those forms. I might need them sooner.
Right, right. Wow. So basically you believe that you should have this conversation at what age do you think's appropriate to sort of start it?
18.
Okay.
Anyone 18 or over, because if they were left in a situation, whether from an accident or an illness, and couldn't speak for themselves, someone has to start making decisions. And they need to have some time to think about who that should be. People don't get married as quickly as they used to. So a lot of, I can tell you, both of my children are in their 30s. They don't have partners. So who is it that's going to make decisions if something happens to them?
Right. So before you start thinking about who you should speak to or who you should have this conversation with, right? There's always key people that come to mind that you're like you said, a significant other.
Yeah.
I was watching a TV show today, actually. It was really interesting. And the mom, they had lost a really valuable member of the community, and it was sudden. And the mom said, oh, you know, I need you to know. And the daughter was like, I don't want to know. And she goes, I know. And that's why I left everything with this person, so that it took the pressure off the daughter. And I think, you know, we need to know it's okay to not just necessarily dump it on a certain family member. Like it used to be, you're the oldest, good luck.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's always the best person. So how do you deal with that?
Oh, you're bringing up such a great point, and it's one of my favorite topics, because you're right. People used to have a mindset of, my spouse is just assumed if I'm married, and if I'm not married, then my parents are assumed. My children are assumed, you know, but they may not be the best choice. And the way I would approach it, and the way we've been, you know, working in hospice to talk about it, is to say, think first about what matters most to you and who matters most to you. So I have people actually write those things down and make a list. And look at the names you've put down of the people who matter most to you. And do they know those things on the list of the activities or the qualities, values you have in life that matter the most? And then think about, if you were really sick, could they make decisions for you that wouldn't be what they want necessarily? They would know you well enough to know what you would want and be able to make those tough decisions. And sometimes spouses are not the best person because they're too emotional about it, and they know that, and they don't really want to make those decisions. It's a hard thing after someone dies to question, did I do what they really want? Did I make the right decision? So that's both a good reason to have these conversations, but it's also something that individually people have to decide, are they the best person to be in that situation?
So it sounds like, in your opinion, you need to kind of do some self-work first before you really even actively have the conversation with someone, right? And I know, what are some of the things, you've mentioned a couple, but so are there any other kind of things like that should be asked before you bring it up with someone?
You know, I think a lot of people test the waters these days, so maybe bringing it up with a close friend. I've been thinking about blah, blah, blah. Have you made any plans yourself? You know, just a kind of an informal back and forth. I think that's important in any of these conversations, is to make it informal.
Right, and I think that's where I get tripped up with that. I'm like, okay, I gotta, you know, instead of just kind of being relaxed, and there are some really good key words you could use, like vocabulary, again, like you said, the way we discuss it and bring it up is really important. I noticed that you brought some cards. I think people have gotten super creative.
That's
and
right.
There's like, those cards are like games you can play. Is that how that works?
Yes, they started probably over 10 years ago now, and this was the first one. Oh no, this is from a funeral home. This is life. There's a lot to talk about. And this one, Go Wish, is really basic, but there's another game that I didn't have a copy of called Hello that's got better questions. You can find any of this online.
Right.
So this is really to identify what's most important to you. So it says, to know how my body will change, to be mentally aware. They all go into just different values that you might have in life, and they are good tools to help you think about it. And I think also when you listen to the news at night, when you watch movies, stories will come up. So again, anything that triggers oh, well, I wouldn't want that,
Right.
are great conversation starters. My mother-in-law, who had 10 children, one time was talking about a sister-in-law of hers who had a stroke and was left completely dependent on other people for her care. And my mother-in-law said to me, "I don't ever want that." And I said, "Tell somebody who can do that. Tell
Right.
somebody who can help you with that." Because I knew that they weren't going to look to me for decisions. So those are really good starting points where you've heard what somebody wants, and now the task is to find somebody who will follow through on it.
Well, and I think, again, it comes through most of the time we think of having those conversations when crisis hits and
Right.
something really horrible happens.
Yes.
But, I personally think there's certain markers in life, like when you get married, you and your spouse should have these discussions. And if you don't get married,
Yep.
like you said, make your wishes and things like that. Are there any other, and I also think the other side is everyone thinks that once you've said it, it's cemented, and it's like that's not necessarily
Right.
you could change your mind.
Great again, Andrea. So what you're bringing up for me is my parents' generation filled out these nice little forms and had their lawyer sign them and put them in a file somewhere and lock,
Yep.
turned the key.
Done.
I didn't know they existed. I didn't know where they were. And I've had experiences with people where they've been named the person who's going to make decisions and we're never told.
Oh.
And things happen and they show up in the emergency room with their loved one, and the nice social worker comes in and says, "Tag, you're it. You need to make decisions." And they go, "What?" So these forums so the conversation is the most important thing, but it's not one and done. You can change your mind, and you should bring them out every few years and just revisit. So the guidance in general, what I've heard is every 10 years at least, you should look at it. Doesn't mean you need to change it, but you should look at it and say, does this still work?
Is this still what I want?
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. I think it's tricky too, if you're wanting to have the conversation, you've done all your work, you're ready, because it takes a lot of courage, I think, on all parts to do that. And then you're telling this person, and this person goes, "Stop, not interested. I am not responsive to this."
Yeah.
How do you first find, your next person?
Yeah.
And if that person then has a change of heart and says, "Listen, I needed a second to process what you were asking me,"
Yeah.
how do you think you should navigate through those sorts of situations?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to find out. There's no right or wrong here. So if somebody says, "I can't listen to this, I can't hear this," then I might say, "You probably don't want to be the person making decisions for me, then, do you?"
Right.
But I also might say, "Have you ever thought about what you would want and who would make decisions for you?" So one of the points in all of this is don't ask somebody else to do something if you haven't done it yourself.
Very good. Yep.
So even if you don't write anything down, read through the forums, read through the questions, or just think about what would you want yourself and tell somebody. I really think that's the most important part, is to start a conversation with yourself. And then if you know that you can't be ready to help someone else, to give them permission to look for someone else, or to say, "Let's revisit this."
I think too, as a mom, it's hard to have this conversation with, say, children at 18. I know that I have had it now since I've gotten involved in this, but it's tough because, they look at you like mom,
Yeah.
and you don't want to hurt them or make them worry or whatever.
Right.
What are some conversation, again, starters that can put you in the right direction where it may be a little less, I don't know what the word is, where it's like, can we just talk about this in a nonchalant, structured area or something,
So with my kids, and I mean, this works, I think, in general, but in the car. So
Okay.
when you're on a fairly long
They're all hostage.
They're hostage.
Hostage situations.
And you can tell. I mean, if it's your children, you
Right,
know.
yes.
Are they rolling their eyes? Are they like not in a place to listen to this? But they don't have to. For me, they don't have to say a lot. I just can sort of put it out there that I know this isn't probably what you want to talk about, but I've been thinking about this, and this is what I would want, and I need to start telling you what I would want, but I also need to know what you would want. And you don't have to tell me right now, but let me know.
Right, right.
If you pick somebody else, that's fine with me. Just let me know.
Just make sure you have someone.
Just make sure you have someone. Absolutely.
Wow. So some, we've kind of touched a little bit, like conversation starters. Instead of just having this big, I need to talk to you, come on over, or whatever, what are some, just areas or things that people can do to just more easily have these conversation starters, other than the car?
Right. Well, I'll tell you another one that's got history with hospice, which, some people hate this idea, I know. There's a saying to do it on Thanksgiving. So initially, so going back when I started doing hospice, there was Hospice Sabbath, and November is still National Hospice and Home Care Month.
Okay.
So we always did special events in November to honor hospice and end-of-life care. So there was this theme of doing a community presentation or having the chaplain go out and do something at a church on Hospice Sabbath, which was the Sunday before Thanksgiving. So out of that evolved this saying about you can't have pie until you tell us how you want to die.
Wow.
So the idea was when the family comes for Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
And again, the
Yeah.
people from out of town that you might not see at other times during the year. So when everybody's gathered after you've had the big meal, to go around the table and say, you can't have pie till you tell us how you want to die.
Wow.
Now, for some families, that worked. It's to me, it's like New Year's Eve, where you set your resolutions. That some people hate that stuff, and some people get into the habit. It becomes a tradition, and then, of course, you can change your mind. The good thing about it, if people are willing, is that everybody hears the same thing at the same time. So, particularly in big families where maybe not everybody agrees when it actually comes time to have decisions made. So your point about having these conversations before a crisis are so important, because you can look back on some of those lighter conversations and go, oh yeah, this is what they said and we all heard it.
Right, right. Which I think is another point where I don't know what the best answer is. Do you do it with one person in your family, or is it better to do a group situation, And when I was doing some training, it was, the dad was had been given a terminal illness, and the whole family was around. And you can tell, unfortunately, everybody was at such a different part of the process that it just really upset so many people. And that was pretty much the lesson in that topic. But I guess it's just kind of, if everything's good and you're trucking along and you just kind of been thinking about it, I've heard it's a good idea to do it when you're going on a walk. You just do it in certain situations instead of making it a big deal.
Right.
You just kind of go, this is something that's been on my mind. And I guess, is it okay to sort of say, what are your thoughts? Because I know the other caveat is you try to change the person's mind when they've shared with you what they would like, and you're like, no, I don't agree with that.
Oh, but again, I would say that's a really good reason to have the conversation, because if my daughter said to me, I can't do that, then I would say, well, then you can't be my decision maker, right?
Right, right.
And people, we've relaxed those rules. So even in the legal world, those rules have been more relaxed, so that a person could choose someone who's not an immediate relative. If you have a cousin who's a neighbor or a close by person you see more often, they can be your decision maker.
Yeah, I know too. I know we had a situation where my grandmother died in Canada, and the person who was the executor lived in the U.S. without knowing that you can't cross border things. And so
Yeah.
you learn, unfortunately, when you don't have the conversations, you learn really quick in a horrible situation, another event you have to take care of, another crisis you have to kind of a fire you have to put out, where if this was all talked about beforehand and you knew about it, would make it a lot easier, you know?
So go back for just a minute, because the scenario you've set up about I couldn't do that for you. If the person that I'm talking to about the decisions that I want says to me, I don't like that decision. There are people who say, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to make decisions about my wishes for care. I'm going to let whoever it is, I'm going to let.
I'll be dead, it won't matter.
Well, or people can be too upset thinking about it for themselves, and they can say, nope, I don't want to think about that, but I'm going to trust whoever it is that they name, and whatever they want is fine with me. And that's okay too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the whole thing too. There's no right or wrong, just actually have a thought about it maybe, and maybe write it down so that, or tell someone so they all understand this is what, you wanted. Should you, before you have the conversation with someone, sort of have a list of the things you really want to get across?
Sure. But it's so individual. The most important thing, again, is knowing who would know me well enough, who knows you well enough to know whether you could live with compromises that may occur from the decisions that are made. In other words, if I'm vented, am I going to be okay with that if I can never get off the vent? If I am going to live in a nursing home for the rest of my life, am I okay with the decision that saved me and put me in the nursing home? You think through some of those scenarios.
And I guess that's the point too, is like you're mentioning things that, how do you learn what you should be talking about? I know that, there's paperwork and stuff, we'll get into that another time, but just as you're preparing to have that conversation on what your wishes are, it just seems so, maybe that's the other part of it, it just seems so overwhelming. There's so much to think about. And how do you sort of put into order what should happen, or what order of things you'd like to have happen, or just having the conversation?
You can't, because none of us know what we're planning for. And even in hospice, I can say some of the family conversations that I was part of, we would try to be very careful if a family member said, don't worry, Mom, I won't let you go to the nursing home. Don't worry. I know you want to die at home. You will die at home. Making those promises are not the best idea, because we don't know what's going to happen. Even when we're doing hospice care, there could be a change in their symptoms that would require more intervention to keep them comfortable. So we try to give people permission. If if you are both understanding the goals of care, and again, well, we haven't talked about this. Hospice is a team approach, a philosophy. We want to get the patient's wishes and goals of care front and center. So if we're all honoring those goals of care, let's give each other permission to make decisions as they're needed, not promise one thing that maybe we can't achieve, because then it's setting people up to feel guilty.
Right. And I think too, under the duress of all of it too, you just don't know. And I think that's a very valid point to, having the conversation with your so-called wishes kind of thing, and then when the actual event ends up happening. I think also too, we talk a lot about hospice because you worked in hospice, and hospice tends to have a little bit of a longer time frame, right? But when you suddenly pass, it's completely different. With what we've seen in the last couple of years, it's kind of a no warning. And all of a sudden you're on top of everything else. You have to make these decisions.
Yes, and that is the whole point of what we're talking about, that anyone 18 or over should be thinking about this and have a conversation, because it's so much easier, and it's a gift to everyone, to the person who needs a decision made for their care, but also for anyone who's going to be in the position of making decisions for someone else. It's a gift to have had these conversations and know what
So
the
your
other person
Yeah,
might
so your
want.
experience has shown, because I'm sure you have stories of the unfortunate when there were no wishes like laid out, and
Right.
you've had to have those conversations, or you've seen people, loved ones struggling.
Yeah.
That's
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
that's kind of. One of the things you mentioned was the Thanksgiving dinner, which I thought was awesome. I don't know, I might try that this year, see how that goes. Mind you, we normally just are immediate family, and we've done that kind of thing. But what about, I know we talked about the cards, which I thought was fun, but there's another thing out there called
Death over dinner.
Death over dinner.
Yeah,
Okay. Are
Death
those
over dinner. So yeah, Death over dinner came up after death cafes are another format that is actually more popular, and they do exist around New Hampshire and Massachusetts and
I've never
Vermont.
attended one. Have you
Yeah.
gone to a death cafe?
No, I've been going to go to one. So they're usually short, about an hour, and they're in the general public, like in a library or in a
Okay.
meeting space in a community. And so not tied to a church or anything like that. And they're very much an open conversation. Just come and tell us your thoughts on death and dying. Tell us your thoughts, tell us your fears. And a lot of it can be conversations about, oh, I know I'm going to have to do this for my parents someday, or gee, I just got diagnosed with something and I don't know where to start. So they're very much an open-ended kind of conversation that you just sort of go with whatever comes up. Death over dinner is much more scripted, and you invite 6 to 10 people to dinner. So it's a small group, but there are set questions that you can go through, and it drills down much more on actual scenarios and decisions that you might have to make. So it's really asking you more to think about what kinds of treatment, intervention you're willing to have, not willing to have. So when you think about feeding tubes or actual medical treatments, even chemo radiation, which can be harsh, it's really drilling down on, is this what you want? I think the medical community, we've gone over the last 50 years from there's not anything more we can do to do everything. Medical care has made great strides, which is wonderful, but now there's consequences from doing everything.
Right. So death over dinner actually sounds like a really kind of interesting idea as well. But we're almost out of time. Are there any websites that would give some information if people want more information?
Oh, sure. There's actually more out there than there used to be, but I'd start with the Conversation Project, and you can just Google
Great
that.
one. Yeah.
And I think I gave you a list you can post for
Yep.
people who are interested. And certainly these cards are a great idea. And there's workbooks, so I brought a couple of
I have
examples.
one.
You've got one.
I'm not dead now. I'm dead now. What?
Yeah, and this is one, death midwifery, which is similar to doulas, but this is threshold care, which exists in New Hampshire.
Well, Janice, thank you so much for
You're
taking the
welcome.
time to come and tell us all about this. That's all the time we have for Guided Crossings. We'll see you next time.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.